This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Ho, 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 we made this.
Welcome to the Starlight Ballroom. Hey!
Welcome to We're Always Right, a Prince Among Men podcast. Only on the We Made This Podcast network.
Fuck's sake.
Oh, God.
No, you're listening to Shipwrecks and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, only on the We Made This Podcast network. Only we're not talking about Red Dwarf because it's another mandated one that Mark's threatened us with. It's like, we've got to do another special. And again, we're going to be covering A Prince Among Men, the Chris Barrie sitcom. And as I seem to be the Chris Barrie side project connoisseur, I'm now hosting this one. So I'm starting to worry that I'm going to have to start reading up on trains and trucks or whatever documentaries he's done is. So, but yeah, so the Chris Barrie kind of comedy stuff. And we're talking about, I think, the show that arguably he left Red Dwarf to do in 1997, which is pretty much the year of Chris Barrie on the BBC, it seems. So Prince Among Men aired in September of 1997. Earlier in the year, concurrently, you had Red Dwarf 7 and the last series of the British Empire. So naturally, as Chris Barrie's kind of winding down, wanting to do new stuff, he then kind of signed on to do this sitcom created by Tony Millen and Michael Walling, who had written a few episodes of British Empire in the past and also created Out With a Bang, which was, I think, a kind of science fiction sitcom that lasted 7 episodes at the start of the 90s. And came up with this new comic creation called Gary Prince, a former international footballer who turned entrepreneur. And yeah, this is a show. I just realised I've not introduced my co-host yet.
You probably should, yeah.
Yeah, and hoping to speak firstly, Mark Adams, how are you?
I'm alright, but I take umbrage with the fact that I shoehorned this in. We discussed this, and we decided that we wanted our Christmas episode in 2022 to be our 100th episode. This was shoehorned in for a specific reason. Also, hello.
And also with us is Carl Bryan.
Hello, Matt. Hello, Mark.
Right, back me up, Carl.
I can't remember, Mark.
Oh!
We get conversations off you at 2 a.m.
That's because I have an odd body clock. And by body clock, I mean in lack of.
No, I think one of the kind of things that we kind of like to do, and I think secretly probably like and enjoy doing sometimes, is expanding and getting as many episodes as possible, but also covering what the Red Dwarf cast, crew, or tangibly related stuff happens. Sometimes it doesn't work when we have to cover Captain Butler. Other times it pays off really, really well. For example, something that you'll be hearing starting next year, and I love it. Or
you can tell them it's Crime Traveller. We told them we're doing Crime Traveller a lot of times, Matt.
Oh yeah, so yeah, Crime Traveller.
We're doing all 8 episodes separately. We've also told them that already.
Yes.
But I'm really excited for it because it was great.
Yep, and I can't wait for you to hear that. But we quite like getting into kind of like the side projects or other projects and stuff. So, for example, the British Empire, arguably perhaps the thing that Chris Barrie might be remembered for in the mainstream, perhaps more than Red Dwarf in certain circles. But then he also tried to dabble with a new comic creation, as I said earlier, Gary Prince. And so it lasted 2 series, and watching it, I was questioning why. But then I think anyone who's listened to You Have Been Watching with Tony Black and Rob Turnbull, there's a conversation there, particularly around this era, where they say they used to do 2 series at a time. So like if you had a series commissioned, they would do 2 series minimum, which explains why there's 2 series of this.
I didn't know that, but now you've said it, there's quite a lot of sitcoms that weren't very good that got a second season. I remember watching Ain't Misbehaving because it had the Doctor in it.
Yeah.
Peter Davison. And it was bloody awful. And then it got a second season and I was like, oh, maybe it's going to get better. It didn't.
That makes a lot of sense for a lot of things at the time, like Chalk. I remember that getting so panned
like universally panned, and that got a second series. And everyone's like, I don't understand this. But hearing that that's the kind of deal that the BBC do. I mean, at the end of this series, they immediately announced that he's going to be back next year, which initially I was like, well, that's a bit overconfident. But if it's already contractually written in, I mean, that also goes back to when they talked about how Red Dwarf got commissioned. It's because they'd already penciled in Happy Families 2, but there was no intention of making a Happy Families 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting, yeah.
I can't remember which episode they have that chat in. And I remember just quickly, briefly asking Rob on the We Made This Discord server, and he said, I think it was just like a period of the time. They don't do it anymore because the nature of commissioning stuff's changed.
Well, they got burnt lots of times as well, I would suggest. Are we going to do series 2 of this?
If we can find it online, because I can't. I kind of want to, because series 2, 3 episodes in, went from prime time on a Thursday night to sticking it at 3:15 on a Sunday afternoon to burn the last 3 episodes off. So I'd be really interested to see it, but I can't find it online, and it was never released on DVD.
Oh, right. I mean, we did find this on YouTube, didn't we?
Yeah.
That is where we watched it. But was Series 1 ever released on DVD? Have we been naughty, or are we doing the only way we can watch it?
I think it's the only way we can, because it's never been seen on DVD.
Good grief, it was that disliked.
Yeah, and I generally cannot find Series 2. There's one episode of Series 2 which has been mislabeled as a first series episode, which I haven't watched. I skipped that one. But I can't, for the life of me, find anywhere online.
I guess we could appeal to our listeners. If you know where Season 2 is, anywhere on their interwebs, send it our way and we'll do it. Otherwise, it doesn't look like we can.
Yeah, so, Phil, please let us know if you do know, or if you know where we can find copies of it, because I definitely want to subject Carl to Series 2.
Right, there's this lovely person who, on Twitter, who interacts with us quite a lot. They're clearly a huge fan of Chris Barrie. They're at BritasFan on Twitter, and they're called the British Empire fan page. And they've been loving your Britas coverage, Matt. And maybe they can help. Hello, Britas fan. Do you know where we can watch Season 2 of A Prince Among Men? Because, like Matt, I would quite like Carl to suffer further.
Just spoiling an opinion from one of our things in here. But, so let's get to it then. So, Carl, what were your general thoughts on Prince Among Men?
I disliked this so much. I couldn't find a single redeeming thing about this program. I didn't laugh. Oh no, tell a lie. I laughed once in 7 episodes, and I've got a horrible feeling that that's from the one that's Series 2. I really disliked the main character. Really disliked them.
Carl, this is so bizarre. You're the one that finds the good in everything. And I don't like football at all. Like, I actively avoid football.
We've broken Carl.
I know. And Carl is normally, like, super positive. And I don't think I hated this as much as Captain Butler.
Yeah, we had that conversation, didn't we? You asked me, like, do I dislike this more than Captain Butler? And yeah, I do.
Shit.
And I remember not enjoying Captain Butler, but I just really disliked this. As bad as Captain Butler was, it had plot in its episodes a little bit, and it had a bit more production. I know it had really shitty production value, but I just found it had more. It's like saying whether I want to be kicked in the balls or kicked in the face. But of the two, I would watch Captain Butler over this if you put a gun to my head. I just dislike this immensely. All the characters are unpleasant, like all of them.
I do have that in my notes. There's no one likable in this. Maybe Sonia was what I wrote in my notes.
Yeah, it was. I remember it being bad back in the day because I remember like you say, I do try and find the positive in a lot of in things. And during this, I remember distinctly at the time watching it, like, yeah, it can't be bad. It's got Chris Barrie in it, and watching it and be like, this is shit. It's just shit.
So, Mark, what about you?
We've established I'm not a fan of football, particularly at this period of time where the money talks over human rights and LGBTQ people's lives and other people who were essentially fucking slaves and died building stadiums, etc. But even before the utter corruption of the FIFA World Cup in Qatar, I just didn't like football. I didn't hate it quite as much as I do right now at this period of time, but it just wasn't for me. I never watched it. I have a team because as a white man in Britain, you're expected to. It's Wolverhampton Wanderers. I don't even know how they're doing. And yeah, I don't like football, is the crux of that. But this was okay. It wasn't something I would watch again. But if it was something that my dad had on when I was there with my dad, I wouldn't howl and scream and ask him to switch it off. It was, do you know what? Yes, it had a bit of ick, but it didn't have anywhere near as much 90s ick as I thought it was going to have either. So it was there. I wouldn't go as far as I liked it, but I don't think I hated it. How about you, Matt?
I was watching it, trying to figure out, and I've got several pages of notes. I even got a spider diagram with all the characters on it. I was kind of trying to figure out what it was trying to do and how different it was and stuff. And I find it very interesting in that it seems to be unsure of whether it's supposed to be modern or not. So there's like kind of like weird, out of date tropes and trappings. Whereas like in the late 90s, you were starting to have, particularly Channel 4, starting to kind of test and push forward comedy, or the sitcom, because we're a year off from Father Ted. We're not far off from Space, and I think the Fast Show is about to start kicking up traction here as well. And it feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be. It felt like it was trying to do something different, but then also trying to capitalize on a very similar structure to what the British Empire did, and it never really kind of gets that right. My initial thought is that I think that what we got was a few drafts back, so they filmed the wrong draft. If there was a few more kind of polished drafts, a couple, perhaps merging a couple of characters, kind of reshaping the viewpoint of the main character, then there's probably a kind of very interesting sitcom that could be made from this. But instead, we don't. We have something that feels like it's a mishmash of notes. Like you know that meme that went around. Like if we stuck 1,000 episodes or something into an AI and it came out with something that was like big a few years ago on Twitter.
Yeah,
it's like that with we threw the British Empire with a bunch of BBC sitcoms, and this is what automatically got churned out. Yeah, this is what came out of it, and I was watching it going, yeah, it needs a lot more tweaking, and it could be a lot better than it is, but it isn't. But at least the theme tune's good.
Oh, I actually thought the theme tune was okay, but it really suits the television programme that it's for.
yeah.
What surprised me is that there's a couple of things I remember that have stuck with me with this. The theme tune, I can't believe how much of the theme tune I remembered. I have no idea how I remember, because I don't remember watching every episode originally when it first came on. I remember watching it when it first came on, but the theme tune is stuck in my head, as well as the bit where he goes, never lets it get to his head. I've always got that image of Vince tapping the side of his head whenever that came on. So for some reason, that's always stuck with me.
Yeah.
But are you a fan of football, Matt? Do you enjoy the kicking of the ball?
The kicking of the ball, this was probably around the time I was kind of a massive Man U fan, even though I know a way of watching them apart from...
You're from Birmingham?
Exactly. That's why I'm a Man U fan.
Ah!
Well, actually, I'm actually from Walsall, and do you think? And yeah, I've made a lifetime of taking the mick out of Walsall FC. But yeah, then I at a certain point, I think a certain point, I kind of switched off from trying to watch club football because I never really could do. So what I end up having is that I've got now to a point where whenever there's a major competition, be it the Euros or World Cup, I'm like 10 years old and I'm watching as much as possible. As soon as the major tournaments are done, I'm cut off and I forget the sport exists because I can't do that week in, week out watching football. I mean, watching England is bad enough.
So more of a fan than me, but not a massive fan then.
No, but I mean, I honestly surprise myself at how much football I end up watching during the World Cup. I'm getting the impression that the writers of this also know nothing about football. I'm getting the impression, Mark, that you probably know more about football than the writers of this does because there's hardly anything about football in it.
I was going to say that the fact he's a footballer seems to be almost irrelevant. It's just that's what he used to do. And it's more that he's this entrepreneur now that's just how he made his money.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that he could have made his money with a lottery win and this program would have still worked, thinking about it. There's a few football references and obviously the stuff where he does sports appearances couldn't work if he was a lottery winner. I hadn't even thought about it, but you're right. It is so peripheral that maybe it didn't need to be a football sitcom.
I think what I'm planning to do for the next bit, as soon as we kind of move on, is that I kind of want to talk about, like how I did with the first episode of the British Empire, where we covered the first series with me and Tony Black, that we spent a couple of times talking about the individual cast members or the characters. And I think there are elements of the football side of it, which, again, going back to what I thought could easily been a bit tweaked a bit better with some of the cast. I think there are elements of that probably could need some refining, which kind of capitalise on the football bit. The main thing I think is that the show has the potential to perhaps be about class, and exploration of that, but kind of forgets to do that, even though it occasionally tries to bring that in. For example, you've got the pub landlord Vince, who's also his kind of like his team coach all those years ago. Supposed to be kind of the working class kind of background. You've got Gary. There's hints that Gary kind of come up from a very kind of rough estate or a kind of rough background. There's references to his parents and his brothers like constantly doing time for crimes and stuff. But that's never capitalized on. And then you've got his, I'm assuming, financial director or his accountant, who is very comically upper class, went to private school, speaks with a very upper class accent, and perhaps one of the few jokes that kind of made me laugh seems to refer to older school friends with these ridiculous nicknames. Shagger, it's Donkey, for example. But yeah, particularly I think I can't think of any high profile rags to riches, working class to like rich superstar that perhaps football can be. So I've got a sneak suspicion that the show kind of wanted to be influenced by Gary Lineker, but I think it kind of gave up on that halfway through the brainstorming stage, and the only thing that stuck was the first name. So I think they perhaps had an idea of why to make him a footballer in order to think what's a credible way of someone from a kind of like low income background suddenly have all this money that he doesn't know what to do with. But I don't think they see that enough properly.
I think if you were to do it today, the easiest sort of one would be something like a reality TV star.
Yeah. I suggested lottery winner, but did we even have the lottery at this point? And if we did, it would lose some of the... I think there was some footballiness, but not enough.
I don't think, though, a reality TV star would have that kind of public reverence. I think the idea being is that you need him to be someone that would get a lot of public yeah. So like you'll have someone on the outward facing side, where the majority of people think, oh, he's a hero, he's a legend because he's done this, when in fact he's a bit of a knob.
But
yeah, that is something I noticed throughout is whenever he does like a public appearance or something like that, everybody absolutely loves him. Even though he's very, the personality of him when he's like, I can't remember which episode it is, but he's given a speech, but everyone absolutely loves him, even though he's very much a 90s laddie ex-footballer with his, what seems to be his catchphrase of be good, and if you can't be good, come on back to my place. Which is odd. Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's kind of the reason. Because I can't think of anything around why they've done that. I think the kind of discussion about Gary, I think we'll save that till the last when we talk about them. Because I want to briefly talk about the people around him first. And I think there's almost parallels to how the ensemble is set up to the British Empire. But as we're going along, I'm going to make the case that there's far too many characters in this, which gives it a very splintered kind of identity. So if we start, for example, his landlord Vince, who is supposed to kind of represent his history, and who knew him before he was like this mega superstar, and links to his working class background. And that's that section of it who I didn't like. I didn't like the character of Vince.
Oh, I thought he was vile. Even if Prince is an irredeemable bellend, he's particularly unpleasant, and he's a leech more than anything.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be the character who knows him the most, and can kind of see him as he is. But yeah, he's too antagonistic and like just, and I think the kind of almost reluctant loyalty that Gary kind of show to him is kind of unearned.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like there's something we're missing there, doesn't it? It's this, they talk about how, he taught him everything he knows, but he still hates him. It's really weird. There's no, hidden warmth between them.
No.
And it's just weird. It just feels, again, like you said, there's a couple of drafts missing.
Yeah.
Where it's like the backstory is not thoroughly fleshed out, because during the show I'm been there going, is it a football team? Is it a youth team? Is it again, I think it's because they don't particularly want to focus on the football aspect of it. It's like, what is, because it does remind me of like places places I was around when I was a kid, in like small towns and stuff. There's the local football team, and like it's got a working man's club on the side and things like that. But it's like, right, why would this former England footballer, be hanging around this place? If they own it, fair enough, but why are they going in every day for a beer? It's really weird, his layout. And the more and more as we're getting through the show, and the more we're talking about the other people around them, everybody seems so distant from each other character-wise, and it all seems to be based on their location.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like you could have the thing of, so we'll have a scene at home with Lizelle, then we'll have a scene in reception with Sonia and Bev, then we'll have a scene with Dave in the office, one with Donkey in the other office, and then we'll go to the football club for a scene with Vince. Everybody just seems like it's a video game, and you go to their location to talk to them.
Yeah.
Nice comparison.
I'm nodding along with that. And the first of a few comparisons I'm going to make with British Empire. Now, I've seen people kind of online saying, "Oh, British Empire isn't as good as they remember it." I think the British Empire shits all over this. I think the British Empire has got a lot more competency, and I do want to spend a chunk of time comparing Chris Barrie's three characters a bit. Yeah, so I'm going to try. If I'm suddenly start talking about the character of British, pinch me because we're not there yet.
Okay.
With the British Empire, that's got a kind of big ensemble as well, and at time, I know me and Tony have spoken that with occasionally that you get characters that are underutilized and don't really have much to do. Linda, cough, and they're only kind of there to kind of represent one thing in relation to the British character. What they have, though, is they have a common ground. It's a workplace sitcom. This is more or less a workplace sitcom as well, but all the characters in the British Empire are in one building, so they have the opportunity, an excuse for them to constantly interact with each other because they're going to be in certain places. So, for example, every episode of British, you're going to have multiple characters just kind of talk to each other or interact with each other because they're going to be there in that area. The only time Vince ever seems to interact with any of the characters is when he's coming to moan at Gary at his office, and there's that kind of running joke that they never established properly with him and Gary's like remote control door. But yeah, he just seems so peripheral to everyone else. It just seems weird. If they suddenly switched it so that Vince was his dad, that would perhaps make a lot more sense.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that would actually soften the character a little bit, bizarrely.
Yeah, but at the moment it's just like an island, a very unpleasant island. Yeah, I think that, yeah, it just doesn't click as much. And I think the other character who I think doesn't get as near as much to do, or perhaps could easily have been just cut out completely, is Minty from EastEnders, aka Dave.
Yeah, he could be. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who, at the point where, with at least with the other characters, I can determine what they are thematically supposed to be linked to the character of. Same with Britus and all the cast of them. Dave, I don't know whether he's supposed to be someone who is not confident or anything, because if anything, Liesel has that role. Doesn't seem to any attempt to him to be straight with Gary. That's what Vince is supposed to be doing.
It's fascinating. You mentioned Dave. I had to look through my notes and go, Dave? And I've realised I remember the character, but through 6 episodes, I have not made a single note about Dave. I hadn't even noticed him, let alone noticed that he was completely and utterly irrelevant. Fuck. Ha!
Is he supposed to be his PA, his assistant?
It's just a mate, isn't he?
Yeah. Again, easily that can either be shifted to Sonia or Bev to give them more to do in his role. Yeah, Dave is like the most unnecessary character in the show, I think.
You could combine Bev and Dave into one character.
Yeah.
And then you've got more of the interaction with Sonia. You've got more of the interaction with Gary. If you kept the character as a woman, you could have the romantic thing with Donkey. I can't remember his proper name now, so I'm just going to call him
Mark.
Donkey all the way through. I don't understand why that was 2 characters when it could have easily been one. Maybe they needed to pad out the cast. I don't know. Maybe they wanted to put Cliff Parisi in it for some reason. But yeah, it feels like they've got too many actors for too little characters, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think the times where I think you need a character to kind of tell him straight and not buy into Gary's bullshit. The character that can probably merge with that is Bev, and let's segue to talking about Bev, played by I think one of the more recognisable faces in the cat. Well, apart from Cliff Parisi, who played Dave, who went off to play Minty in EastEnders. Susie Blake, who plays Bev, went on to play a character called Bev in Coronation Street for absolutely years. She's been on Mrs. Brown's Boys for 10 years.
One of the first things I remember before, she did a lot of work with Victoria Wood.
Yeah. She was. Yeah, I think she's one of Victoria Wood's. What was one of Victoria Wood's kind of go-to actresses as well. Because I think she's in Dinner Ladies, isn't she?
I believe so. She always used to. I always remember her playing like a newsreader type, kind of like a slightly stern newsreader type in the ones with Victoria Wood. And I believe she may have been in a sketch show. Not as like a regular person, but she would turn up in it every so often to just do like newsroom sketches. But yeah, she's the person, apart from Chris Barrie, she's the person I recognised straight away. And obviously I recognise Cliff Parisi, but there was like, I actually was like, I forgot she was in this. And it was like, well, she's got quite a good comedic pedigree.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I feel that this character kind of isn't fleshed out enough and it lets her down. She's doing what she can.
I think what was said about the whole thing is that potentially maybe that character, maybe the characters are so forgettable. I'm having to look through my notes to remember the names.
Dave.
The guy who is the other guy is the guy with the tash who's his
Donkey.
posh. Yes.
His name's Mark.
His name is Mark, I know. See, I couldn't even remember his name, and his name's my name. But they all have potential, but there is too many of them.
I think with Bev, though, what you've got, going back to the idea of class, you've got Bev who seems to have like gone to university, and because of the finale where Gary gets his degree, she talks about going to university or at least getting like O levels back in the day or something. That she's very kind of intelligent, upper class, kind of almost looks down on Gary.
Oh, he definitely looks down on Gary. I think everyone in the show looks down on Gary, up to and including Liesel.
Yeah, and I think the show doesn't, and only ever does this once, show that Gary's got more street smarts than perhaps that everyone underestimates. But by the time that kind of development's made, it's the end of the first series and reads wrong. Yeah, so you kind of need a kind of like intellectual foil for Gary, who misreads him or misinterprets his kind of working class street smarts and his perhaps hunches and stuff to kind of clash against. And I think that Bev could have been that character. She has that sort of way of being, and I find it quite interesting that out of the whole cast, a lot of the times you've got it's Gary with so and so, Gary with so and so, Gary with so and so. One of the only few times you have scenes where any of the main cast are interacting with each other, it's Bev and Sonia.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is to highlight the difference between, I think, Sonia's upbringing and Bev's upbringing. Because in a slightly refined draft, Bev probably likens Sonia and Gary to be the exact same kind of thing. But I think Bev can perhaps appreciate that Gary's had some athletic skill to make his money, whereas I think she kind of has no idea why the hell Sonia's in the role she is. So she kind of looks down and has a higher opinion of him. In my notes, I've written that she's very hyacinth bucket.
A little bit.
Yeah, you could see her knocking on your door when you move in and going, "Hello, we're from the neighbourhood welcoming committee."
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, I think slightly tweaking, I think she could have been like one of the key kind of characters in the ensemble. Yeah, and if you think to the British Empire, there isn't really a character like that in the British Empire to be that role against a Chris Barrie character, and it's just like the fail potential of this and a few of the other characters just needing a tweak to do it.
I kind of feel that because one of the things that gets built up over the series is that she's basically in love with Donkey. And where that falls down is he completely almost refuses to acknowledge her existence. They even make a joke about it. And to me, that was like, so this goes nowhere. Like, if it was for a couple of episodes and then he starts to warm up to her, you'd be like, yeah, okay, this could go somewhere. But the whole way through, and because I've accidentally watched an episode of season 2, it goes there as well. And it's just like, well, what's the point in this storyline? For this sitcom, I can't imagine they built out this detailed 7-season arc ending with them two getting married or something. But
it's not Nars and Daphne.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I was just like, oh, okay. Well, why are you even bothering with this if it's blatantly apparent you're not going to do it? They just needed something for them to interact with each other without it making an impact in the overall story.
In my notes as well, I've just noticed there's a bit, I think, in the 3rd or 4th episode where she goes to speak to Gary's wife, and there's a bit where she talks about the Berlin Wall.
Yeah.
Which isn't as funny as it should be, but I think in terms of character, is like, I can see what they're trying to do with the character. And that, again, she's looking down and like doing kind of as like a generalization of the fall of the Berlin Wall, to the point where she says like, well, it's a bit of a shame, isn't it? And then Lisa was like, no, it's a big part of the German thing. Yeah, but it's falling down. It's a bit of vandalism, isn't it? Like they vandalised the Berlin, right? Which I think, with a bit more refining of writing, it will be in character to what we think she should be in terms of looking down or seeing things in her own certain point of view. But it also comes across as being a bit slightly misjudged.
Again, a lot of this could have been worse, but it wasn't a tasteful joke, was it?
No. And I think running jokes or ongoing ideas kind of get introduced later on rather than being established. I mean, I think it's episode 5, I think, where suddenly, the last 2 episodes of the series, where somebody says, no, don't call me Bev, call me Beverly. And I'm like, considering how I think British sitcoms are written, I think all 6 scripts would have been written before they started filming. I mean, I'm surprised they didn't go back and add that in earlier, so that the Call Me Beverly was like used at least once in every episode, which isn't. It's only in like the last couple. Flipping back over, we've then got Mark/Donkey, which, going back to what I think that the show kind of wants to talk about, kind of class. I think in a certain draft, I think the idea being that Mark is supposed to represent the upper class, born into privilege, kind of waltzed into these kind of roles. I think Mark's supposed to represent that. I'm pretty sure the university he goes to changes every week. I'm sure he says it's Eton once, and then one week it's Cambridge and then someone else. If not, then that's an ongoing joke they missed.
Yeah. I'd laugh if that was just a cock-up
Yeah.
and they just wrote it and just forgot.
But yeah, so you've got kind of someone who kind of, again, like born in a position of privilege, kind of gets things done by people owing favours. He knows people who loses half of Scotland in a poker game, etc., etc. Clashing with Gary Prince. Now, there are scenes between them where you can kind of feel the writers want to have this as a major part of the show, but do nothing with it apart from have Gary go, "Yeah, bloody upper class," and it doesn't work.
Another thing that kind of gets me about it is, why did he hire these people?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like they're deeply unpleasant. They don't like him. They don't appear to have any skill set that he would have hired them for. Maybe before this, there's a prequel where nobody wants to work for him because they all realise he's an absolute knob.
Maybe he pays well, because apparently one of the things that I'm getting for that is like he seems to have an unlimited amount of money to do whatever he wants with. So maybe he just pays well.
Maybe, yeah. But yeah, it was just I didn't get it. It's so, and the more and more now I'm talking about it, I think that's probably is my main issue with this is the writing.
Mm.
In the characters are just not really fleshed out. That whereas they could be if they put a bit more work into it, and the jokes just don't land.
Yeah. Heading back to the discussion about Mark, I think there was probably mileage about the fact that he kind of also doesn't fully understand or click with Gary on a certain level. And again, a couple of drafts later, you probably have the fact that you got this kind of privileged person who didn't have to earn money. I can probably see a draft later on where he has a bit of resentment working for Gary Prince, who he probably looks down upon like Bev does, and he's working for someone in the upper who went to comprehensive school or perhaps lived in a house with one bedroom or something, and perhaps having more of an antagonistic relationship to it. Yeah. The final episode with the doctorate, I think highlights this. Where I remember watching this last night and thinking, there's an interesting thing where if you've got kind of Gary and his accountant at loggerheads with each other, because I'm getting the impression that Gary's finances are actually in good hands because Donkey is actually really good at managing his money. So when he wants to spend 20 grand on a zoo, he can. But then there's the bit where he says that, oh, the only reason you got the doctorate was to buy this £300,000 map. And Gary said, I know. And that's the thing I was mentioning earlier, where he kind of clocked on to what they was trying to do, and he kind of blindsides Donkey and the university. Again, that I think should be one of the main things of the series, kind of like the main conflict, and it goes back to the relationship with him and Bev. If Bev was perhaps more of his assistant than Dave is, that it's a show about class and what form and the balances of power and how money affects that. It's just the lack of the idea is there, and the idea to have this kind of really good exploration of that theme just falls flat, and I'm sitting there going, it could be so much better than this.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
I think a main reason why a main thing that they needed to have done in order to make that part work is they needed to make Gary more likable. They really did, because that was the main issue. I think I messaged you too. Was I like 15 minutes into the first episode? I was like, I don't like this. And it was primarily because of the Gary Prince character.
Okay, we'll get into Gary in a minute. We just got a couple more. I'm realising I'm going in reverse order of how much I kind of like the characters. We've got two left, and if we move back to kind of the character of Sonia, who I both liked and also found really annoying at the same time.
So my notes for her were as simple as, is this just Alice from Dibley? And I checked my notes. This was after Dibley. And Alice was a very likeable character. She was painfully dumb. And I don't feel like it was as cruel in Dibley as it was in this. I think some of her gags were really unpleasant. about her lack of intelligence.
The big difference, I think, between Alice Tinker and Sonia in this is, I think Geraldine in The Vicar of Dibley genuinely liked and had a lot of affection for Alice as a character. So
Fair
yeah,
assessment.
so as much as Geraldine will probably kind of mock, I think it's the case where if anyone else insulted Alice, Geraldine will probably hit him with a sledgehammer. Whereas
Yeah.
with this, Gary Prince seems to actively despise Sonia.
He's just out and out cruel to her.
Yeah.
Yeah, agree.
He refers to her appearance and everything. And how is Kevin not dead? That was the one I got over the course of the episode. How is her boyfriend just not dead? But with the amount of things going wrong.
Oh, Maris, or the Maris character.
Yeah.
Yeah, the unseen character. Yeah, basically, yeah, probably not up there with Maris from Frasier, but yeah, you get like it's one of those where you get like the unseen impression of how they talk about this character and stuff. But I think what's interesting is that there's a very similarity to Colin from the British Empire in that you need a character who idolizes the main character and kind of fails to see the flaws. Now, Sonia's that character, but I think she's slightly too naive to kind of read into how Gary talks to her and everything. But in Britus, one of the few characters that Britus seems to really find annoying or kind of almost dislikes is the one character who likes him the most. And it's very similar here.
Yeah.
Only I think Sonia and Colin are quite different characters. Colin is shown to be capable in certain aspects, whereas Sonia, again, no idea how she passed the interview because I think like doesn't seem to function at all. There's an interesting thing that I noticed in that, like every time, like at the start of the day, she constantly has this cover over her monitor, and I got no idea why, like a dust cover or something. And I don't know whether that's to do with. I have no idea, and I work with computers as a full-time job, so I don't know whether that's supposed to be a thing or something. But I think quite a few of the kind of ongoing jokes that pay off come from Sonia. I was quite amazed that I remember from when I first watched it the kind of payoff to in the first episode where like they print out I think the Gary Prince t-shirts and then they find the Sonia Loves Kevin on the back. Yeah, which I admittedly I did find quite funny. I thought that was actually quite well kind of achieved and stuff. And there's a couple of kind of developments in the series or ideas in the plots seem to be influenced by things that happen with Sonia, like buying the church and stuff. So again, but I can't figure out where, apart from the fact that you need a character who idolizes Gary, what function else she should have in that plot apart from perhaps being the person who just follows him regardless.
Yeah. And I think one of the problems I had with it was the performance. Yeah, and this is obviously the mid to late 90s where it's like, oh, you've got to be big and this and that, but the voice needed to be toned down like 2 or 3 levels because she's so loud and the accent to me was so grating.
Yeah.
Even if she said something that was like genuinely funny in it, the way that it's delivered, yeah, I know we were joking like this broke Carl, but this just affronted me on so many different points. Yeah, it's weird. The only thing I kind of liked about Sonia's development is when they really start leaning into she might be a stalker. One episode, I thought that would have been a fun thing that they could have explored a bit more. But yeah, it was more hero worship than anything else. But yeah, I don't know. I just didn't. Again, it's a character that could have not been unpleasant, but I ended up finding quite unpleasant. So
Kevin, technically as a character, or certainly a trope of sitcoms, it happens a lot that, you get the off-screen character that is played for laughs because you don't ever get to see them.
Yeah.
And he's completely fucking fascinating. What the hell has happened to this poor geezer in his lifetime? Wow, he's just having a crap time all day, every day, isn't he?
I mean, a few of the things I can remember him is he's basically covered in eczema, from what I remember. He's allergic to rubber. He's allergic to her, And there's just so much stuff where it's like, I almost feel like that they've done it so you could tune in any episode and it doesn't matter where you've tuned in because nothing relates to anything else. Which, yeah, it's a sitcom. I get that's why that's probably going to be something that they want to do. So, if you drop in the middle of season 2, it doesn't matter because everything's going to be wrapped up by the end of the 25 minutes. But with Kevin, it's like I said, he should be dead by at least episode 4.
I mean, I did quite like the gag where it was saying like that she brought him a medical dictionary and now he seems to have everything. Goes, it's currently got emphysema. Side note for Sonia, I think the actress who plays her, Samantha Power, out the whole cast, I think she's got the kind of most active career at the moment. She's been in Ackley Bridge. She was in Coronation Street for a couple of episodes, but she's one of these who seems to appear as a guest character in pretty much everything. And I think with the supporting cast is the character I kind of liked the most, mainly because I think she was the closest we got to the straight character, or the most realistic character out of a lot of them, and that was Liesl, his wife.
Yeah,
who seems to be the sane one. I think she was my favourite out the lot because of that.
Yeah, I'd say if I had to pick a character that was my favourite one, it'd be Liesl, just because, like you say, she's the sane one in the midst of this tornado of bizarre that's going around. At least they gave her a bit of a backstory compared to the others, in that she met him as he was going to. He got lost on the way to the training ground?
Yeah, I think he played for Bayern Munich for a couple of seasons, and that's how we met her.
So the problem I have with Liesl is she is a intelligent, left-wing, likable human being. Why is she with Prince? Because Prince is a horrible right-wing piece of shit. Liesl seems to run rings around him with her emotional intelligence. I like her, and I hate Prince. And I guess you do sometimes get relationships like that, but I don't know. I found it a bit peculiar that she doesn't challenge him as much as she could or should. And why does she stay with him? He's such a cock-waving piece of shit, and I don't get it. But yeah, she is the most likable character.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is she knew him before the fame, or before the majority of the fame.
I don't know. He must have been famous. I mean, because if he was signed to Bayern Munich, he probably was quite a well-known footballer at the time.
Yeah.
Again, theories. I think that I've got theories when we, because we'll talk about Gary as the character in a second. And I think it's a victim of perhaps slight rewrites and the writing failing that. But I think the idea being is that he probably would have been quite famous to work for Bayern Munich, because in the footballing world, it's quite weird in that there's quite a lot of England players. There's not that many that play internationally.
Yeah.
As opposed to others. So, like, any high-profile player who plays for a high-profile team, it's quite big news. So it's kind of like, it's very similar with the Welsh as well. So, like, when Gareth Bale at Real Madrid, it's like, oh, there's a very high-profile Welshman playing in a Spanish, like a high-profile Spanish team. You get in that with Jude Bellamy at the moment, who plays in Germany. Yeah, so I don't think it's before the fame. So he was probably quite well known in the footballing world anyway, unless it's just someone who kind of see straight through him.
Yeah.
And the moments of where he's supposed to be kind of likable, but again, the writing lets him down. Again, going back to what the show probably was supposed to be about, class and viewpoints and everything, as well as the clash with the upper class, with Mark and Bev. I think in terms of that kind of right-wing conservative notion that you hinted at in the show, having a kind of liberal, left-leaning, more progressive wife is perhaps not capitalised on as much as it should be. Yeah. And I also think as well is that when they was creating this, because the writers worked on the British Empire, they probably wanted to go in a direction like, okay, we need to have the least Helen Britus-ish character as possible. And to be fair, they do. Lisa is very much the anti-Helen of that. But I don't think, again, they don't fully capitalise on the potential of that with her.
Which I would say they do with Helen Brittas, actually. I think Helen Brittas is one of the strengths of the British Empire.
Oh, yeah. She, the main, there's the going for the old original Star Trek trio, which are like the MVPs of a show. Whereas, like in the original, we got your Kirk, Spock, and your Bones. In British Empire, it's Brittas, Carol, and Helen. You make the MVPs, but you can't really say that with any of the cast here. So, if you're still with us after about an hour, we're going to be talking about Gary Prince as a character himself.
Good.
So, I find it a very fascinating thing, and it's very hard to not compare with Brittas and Rimmer, because Brittas fundamentally is perhaps Chris Barrie's most not likable, but most honest and earnest, good character who has like the best intentions, who's probably the best good guy out of his kind of repertoire of characters he's played, who just poor decisions or misunderstandings and his own kind of obsession with bureaucracy kind of causes all the issues. Whereas with Rimmer, you get a basic understanding of the psychology of him, so you feel sympathetic to him and you understand a lot of decisions and some of his kind of neuroses and stuff. Gary Prince is actively one of the most unpleasant characters I've ever seen in a sitcom.
Yeah.
I'd agree with you.
And there's hardly any redeeming features, or if there's any attempt at trying to highlight those in the show, it's either it's very subtle and missed, or very badly implemented. And I think one of the key reasons the show does not work is because Gary Prince is a fucking bellend.
Yeah. This is the thing that confuses me is when we talked about Red Dwarf 7, one of the main things Chris Barrie apparently said was he wanted to get out because he had git overload. He was tired of playing these unlikable characters. And then he got out of Red Dwarf. Brittas finished in, I think, April of this year. And then this went out in September. So he must have filmed this not long after Brittas. So I don't know if this contributed to the git overload or was just a very strange move if he was trying to get away from unlikable characters, because he'd completely gone off the deep end here with an unlikable character. You know,
Yeah.
I've never heard him speak about this series, so I don't know how he feels about it. But I don't. When I realised that the writers and creators worked on Brittas, I was like, did he do it as a favour? Was he contractually obligated? Because in terms of performance, he's going for it. He's giving it some to do the character, but the character's such a prick. I'm staggered that he hasn't gone at some point. Hang on, I'm an absolute bellend here, because even if he doesn't mind playing an absolute bellend, this is an irredeemable bellend.
He's a prick among men.
Yeah, exactly. And if basically you have in sitcoms, you kind of have to do it where one's a bellend and everyone else around him is sane, or he's sane and everyone else around him's a bellend. But he's a bellend, and everyone around him seems to be a bellend apart from his wife.
So here's the thing about Gary Prince. The one thing that I put in my notes that I wanted to say more than anything. He is a Liverpudlian who reads the That was clearly deliberate and probably the most repulsive thing about the entire series. I don't live in Liverpool, but I love the city. A lot of my work and a lot of my friends are in Liverpool. I spend time there socially. I spend time there working. And the idea of the in any way, shape or form. This is the city where they fired the people who put posters on bus stations because they put an advert for the in one of their cases.
Yeah.
The idea of a Liverpudlian reading the I nearly switched it off. It is not cool. It is not funny. It is not okay. And if they wanted us to hate Gary Prince, they managed it in buckets within the first few minutes of the first episode for anybody who gives a shit about the city of Liverpool.
And a footballer from Liverpool.
Well, you're right. That makes it fucking worse.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm not. I don't. I'm not going to get too much. I don't want to get too much into discussing about why Liverpool didn't hate the. If you Google it, there are hundreds and hundreds of different sources about Hillsborough and everything. I mean, yeah, you got something which both Liverpool and Everton are united against. The Sun is horrible because of their actions around it, and to have like a Liverpoolian or a Scouser reading the Sun, it's
abhorrent.
it's ridiculous, and that's one of the kind of the big clashes of it that even anyone who's as egotistical as Gary Prince should understand the political reasons of why the is hated in that city.
I don't know why they did it.
Again, I think it's because the writers perhaps didn't know.
How can you not know about the Hillsborough disaster if you're writing a fucking sitcom about football? Even I know about the Hillsborough disaster, and I couldn't name you any single member of the Wolverhampton Wanderers football team.
Dave? I don't know. There's probably someone called Dave.
Dave Wolves.
There was a guy called John DeWolf once, and I loved that there was a bloke with a wolfy name in the wolfy team.
I feel that was their scouts going, bugger it, go on, it'll be a laugh.
That's it, Mark. I'm surprised you don't know Steve Bull.
Yeah.
Oh, what? He's not in the current team, is he?
No, but he's like practically royalty.
I know who Steve Bull is. Of course I know who Steve Bull is.
Anyone who's not listening, Steve Bull is the kind of footballer who, if you saw in Wolverhampton, would probably have the same reaction that the public has to Gary Prince in the show. Like, he's footballing royalty in Wolverhampton.
Yeah, that's probably fair.
Yeah, there's like about 2 or 3 statues of him in the city.
Although Steve Bull probably can't read, so wouldn't be reading the.
Okay.
We'll get letters.
But yeah, I think as well. I think there are moments where I think with Gary that they kind of want him to be egotistical, but deep down, kind of a nice guy, but they don't do that well. I mean, there's the bit where the ending of episode 4 or 5 where he buys the zoo, where he says, "Oh." He then makes it into kind of like a conservation centre, but originally he wanted it to be a place where you can shoot paintballs at animals.
Oh, don't get me started about the ethics of zoos.
Yeah, and
I love conservation type zoos. I visit them regularly, but shitty zoos are another one of my fucking bugbears.
And I think the idea, I think the original idea of the character, I think again only shows up, I think, at the end of the series where he kind of challenges Mark or Donkey about the fact that he realised that the only reason he got the university degree was to try and get his money to buy that map. And he says that he kind of plays against it and then ends up spending the money on the now renamed Gary Prince Old People's Home, which in a slightly different, slightly rewritten draft is a kind of like a decent way for the quote-unquote protagonist / good guy to end the series on. But those character traits, that conflict, the kind of reasoning to help Vince just isn't as established. I mean, like we've already got hints that Gary's already bought Vince's bar or pub or ground or whatever already, and yeah, and you can see how grateful Vince seems to be. It just doesn't line up.
No.
In another draft, you'll have someone who kind of wants to be more famous or revered into this character.
I mean, in another revision, Vince would be like you say, the fatherly, gives him advice, shows him the error of his ways, kind of thing, and he just isn't.
And perhaps the conflict between this like old people's home where the floor keeps falling through. That probably was more established. Like he goes, oh yeah, you're getting your fancy degrees and stuff where there are people falling through holes in the floor. Like there's probably a joke there saying like they call it the Arthur Soundside because it was the first person to fall through a floor. Because any more of the old people that fall through, they're gonna run out of room on the sign for the name or something stupid like that. But again, it's just not established much, and it just doesn't come across as genuine. So for example, like the one where like he wants to buy the church. So he finds out that the church is a church, or well, a church hall's for sale because Sonia and Kevin are going to get married there. In a tighter written sitcom, there'll probably be a thing where that the kind of idea that Sonia thinks that Gary brought it for her is there, but not really used as a punchline whatsoever, or even thought even part of the kind of final convergence of that storyline. But then he gets involved like in a charity thing who uses it to store supplies to ship off to Cameroon or whatever. But then he wants to use it to store go-karts, to demolish it and make a go-kart, which like kind of in character, but then accidentally ends up donating 15 go-karts to Cameroon. So yeah,
Cameroon, yeah.
because like they can drive to get the water now, and which okay. It's a funny, almost like a funny line. It just, I don't know, something about the way that works and Gary's reaction to it. Yeah, it's just something. Yeah, it just didn't hit home. And if they wanted the character to be like secretly kind of good natured, then he probably would have like accepted it. But he seemed really rather pissed off that his go karts were done for charity. That's 20 grand I've lost.
Yeah, none of it lands properly, does it?
No.
There's a lot of Tories, there's a lot of characters that, you know, when bad things happen to them, you're kind of pleased and you feel a bit guilty about it. But then there's a lot of characters where when good things happen to them, you're like, the only characters I want nice things to happen to are Sonia and Liesel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's even then, like Liesel seems to be just plodding along and getting on with it. Really, she's very resilient.
See, I think the idea that Gary's supposed to have this kind of like compassionate side to him that gets overshadowed by his ego, and she sees that side of him would make sense. But we don't get any evidence apart from a couple of glimpses that there's supposed to be that side to Gary. Instead, we just got him kind of moaning about the fact that he's not on newspapers or anything, or that his wife got like there's a whole thing about like the newspaper article ended up being about Liesel rather than him and stuff. Now, if that was Gordon Brittis, I mean, well, depending on who's writing the Gordon British Empire, because there are kind of issues with the British Empire that they sometimes get this wrong as well, is that I can kind of see British having like an article written about him, but then perhaps it being about Helen, and then perhaps being slightly disappointed about that. But then at the very end, whereas Gary Prince probably annoyed that he gets one mention I can see a British Empire episode where he goes, she's kindly supported by her champion husband Gordon, and I can see Gordon Brittis being like really proud of that moment because he's people are like, because then someone's kind of made the effort to kind of just briefly mention that Brittis has had an influence, or kind of like his kind of support of someone's been referenced, whereas with here Gary moans the fact that he's only got like what mentioned in one sentence, and like, oh yeah I suppose so, like stuff, and I'm like, oh prick.
Yeah
It's
interesting, that one, because it takes so many turns, because that whole episode's about it gathers the old team together. There's a few things in that episode that I thought were going to be a setup to something else, like the player who killed his parents.
Yeah.
Or Derek, who's now, was it Deborah and Vincent? I actually thought that was kind of oddly innocent. The fact that Vince is like, he's fascinated by Deborah and he can't stop thinking about her.
Yeah, I don't think the Deborah jokes were horrible. Anything that plays a transition for laughs does grate with me a little, but it could have been so much worse.
I was fully expecting a lot of 90s ick, but oddly there wasn't.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, there's a few things in this series that I thought were going to happen that didn't. One was I thought the guy who killed his parents was going to be more of a factor in that episode. Two, it's the first one where he thinks he's going to get done by This Is Your Life, isn't it?
Mm.
And when it was like, oh, I've got to go see a man about a book, I've got to go see this person and this person, I initially thought, maybe this is from Brittis that this happened, that I thought Dave and Lizelle was going to be having an affair, because that made all the sense in the world to me that Lizelle would have an affair because he's so irredeemable.
Mm.
And also, everybody else is a prick in this sitcom. Why wouldn't Lizelle be a prick in this sitcom?
Yeah, that does make sense. But I'm glad she wasn't in a lot of ways.
One of the few things that I kind of did quite like, I quite liked the kind of slapstick or ongoing things around his obsession with technology, and like what some of the kind of unique things he has. Like, I think in the first episode he has the thing that pours the wine automatically, and that kind of plays up. Watching it first, I was watching in the first like 5 minutes or something, I was thinking, oh god, I'm gonna have a 15-minute rant of Mark talking about death of dogs and stuff. But thankfully, it isn't.
Yeah.
It's a very strange misdirect of thinking that he's killed a dog.
Yes.
Within the first minute.
Yeah. I was like going, oh god, we're gonna have to talk about this, aren't we? But then thankfully, it turns out that the dog just jumps onto that. In fact, the dog's more of a threat than anyone else in there.
Yeah.
I mean, in the last episode, he has the touchscreen painting which controls everything, which I did quite like. I mean, the phone being the mouth that moves, I did think that was quite funny. But other than that, I think it's more like a really missed opportunity, like the missed sitter, using football terminology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's weird as well to me that there's this whole thing of he owns the club, but the club's like they're putting out garden furniture for seating, but in his own house, it's Tracy Islanded up to the hilt. Part of me thought there might be some comedic efforts in him trying to improve the club somewhat by doing stuff like that. But yeah, no, he doesn't. I said to you yesterday before we recorded that I laughed once, and now I realise it is the episode in series 2 that did it. But it's with regards to the ground. Is Vince is putting out garden furniture, and he starts doing this big think of all the things we could do speech. And I don't know why this is what made me laugh. But he was like, we could have this, facilities, toilets. And he says toilets in such a aspirational way that actually made me go, huh. And that is literally the only time I laughed in the whole series. Apart from Chris Barrie's shirt in one scene. But apart from that, that was it. I didn't laugh once. The more and more I think about it, the writing is the biggest millstone around the neck, and the characters is a big millstone, and the performances of some people, and one of those people is Chris Barrie, in that he's giving he's giving it gusto, but it's not great. Like anytime Gary has a photo opportunity, he is mugging and like doing like almost like kung fu poses and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And it was just that thing of, we've all seen on television people like this, like some proper wankers in real life that happen to be celebrities, but even they don't do that. If it's supposed to be this like hyper reality, which it kind of is with all the gadgets and stuff, but it's just not good.
I'll take that as your closing statements on A Prince Among Men, Carl. Mark, any closing statements before we finish?
I expected it to be unsalvageably wretched. It was only bad.
Okay. It was only bad. It's only bad. The new podcast coming soon from you.
If we find series 2, I will watch it because I want to see if they manage to do something. But if they filmed it all in like the same amount of time, which I've got a feeling they might have done, I can't see it getting any better.
I bet you because of the way that it perhaps would have been commissioned and filmed. And I'm assuming that it was already produced or in the midst of being produced. So series 2 perhaps was not written with the criticism of series 1.
Yeah.
Which probably means that series 2 is not going to address any of them. So yeah, again, if anyone knows of how we can see series 2, please let us know.
Or even then, the writers may not give a toss, because I don't know if you ever watched Mitchell and Webb. They had a sketch back in the day called Lazy Sitcom Writers, or Lazy, and they insert the genre writers, where they just don't care, and they're just coming out with stuff like, they do a medical drama and
yes,
without knowing anything, and they try and resuscitate someone and go, oh no, we killed him with too much electric, stuff like that. This kind of feels like that in sort of, they're kind of hoping Chris Barrie can mug his way through some of it, and it's just, like you said, they don't know anything about football, or it's very apparent they don't know anything about football. And I think they're thinking that the performances are going to carry it through, and it's not worked.
Yeah, I think my final word is that I think there was so much potential in it, or a lot of interesting ideas they could do with the premise, that they just missed. And I'm a bit sad about that.
So big finish if you're listening.
Please don't.
Bring back A Prince Among Men, but bring it back in the right way by hiring us to write it.
Okay, good.
We'll put Mark in it as Gary Prince. Because, and this is the thing I pointed out last night, it took me, what did I say last night? 6 episodes for me to realise he was Liverpudlian and not from the West Midlands.
Yeah. The accent was a bit wanky.
Yeah. Because somebody actually has to say to him, you're Liverpudlian. And again, I think that's the episode that's actually from Series 2. So I would have gone through the entire series thinking he was from the West Midlands. And then the second series, I'd have realised he's actually supposed to be Liverpudlian.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Which, considering you two are from the West Midlands, I should have really noticed.
Yeah.
That's it, though. When I started rewatching, in my head, from when I first remembered it, I was convinced he was a Geordie. And then when I started watching it, I'm like, no, hang on, that's a Scouse accent. For some reason, I always thought he was from the northeast.
Yeah, which, considering like Chris Barrie's coming from like Spitting Image and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, a few things I've seen online say he's basically using his Lister voice from the audiobooks.
Oh, God.
Oh, that does make sense, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's good in the audiobooks because it's not supposed to be perfect. I think it's fun, but I don't know. It didn't quite hit it on this.
Yeah, and we aren't looking at him with what appears to be a perm. A mulleted perm.
It's beautiful.
Mullet perms are going to come back, people.
I don't think they are.
Mullet perms were a big thing with footballers back in the day. But, yeah, that was A Prince Among Men. Series 1. Yeah, look forward to see if we ever get to see Series 2. Bring it on.
We'll do it if we can, I think. But if we can't, we can't.
Yeah. So, if you've lasted this long and you've not watched it, I say if you're curious, watch it. If you're not curious, watch Crime Traveller instead.
Yeah.
Mark, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
If you're looking for me personally, it's at MarkAdamsHC on Twitter and Instagram. I tweet about podcasting occasionally, but it's usually about my work as a humanist celebrant and or wrestling ring announcer. If you're looking for another podcast that features me, the one that I'm currently very active on is called Chucky Vision. It's a podcast about the horror franchise Chucky or Child's Play, and we've just finished looking at Series 2 of the Chucky TV series. And we are now looking at weird and wonderful things related to Chucky over the next goodness knows how long. And first up is a Christmas film starring the guy who plays Chucky in a very, very different role. That's coming out in December as like a Christmassy special. At Chucky Vision on Twitter.
Carl?
If you want to find me, including my Prince Among Men fan fiction, you can find me at allmylinks.com/Mr. Carl, and it's the unabbreviated MISTER.
And you can find me under Pick a Disc on anywhere, socials, etc., etc., etc. And you can also find me on Ask Us About Loom, my 2 podcasts, one's about music, one's about video games. I'm not going to go too much into detail. You probably heard me talk about them all over the place. And if you kind of like Shipwrecks Comatose, you can find us on Red Dwarf Pod on Twitter. That's the best place to get in contact with us. If you've watched Prince Among Men, let us know what you thought. If you agree, if you disagree, let us know. And yeah, that is it. We've spoken about Prince Among Men, and it's time to sign off for another sign off this special. And as always,
You're bloody awful at that.
I am always right.
Oh, God.
Shipwrecked and Comatose, a Red Dwarf podcast, was created and produced by Mark Adams and Kurt North. You can find us on Twitter at Red Dwarf Pod. and we are part of the We Made This Podcast network, which can be found online at wemadethispod.com or on Twitter at wemadethispod.
Hello everyone, this is Tony Black, co-host and producer of You Have Been Watching, a podcast all about British sitcoms. Myself and co-host Robert Turnbull take you on a range of Britcom subjects and shows in our discussions, including greats such as Fawlty Towers.
Basil, in the same way as David Brent and Alan Partridge and Victor Meldrew, Basil works best when he is actually dealing with arseholes.
Lesser known curios such as 15 Stories High.
There are all these kind of like gag setups being put in place in that episode, and then the sort of the end like minute or so is basically the payoff to all of these gags, and it's very, very sitcom-y.
And even top 10s such as sitcom theme tunes. If we have to put composers of theme tunes in context for British sitcoms, I think Ronnie Hazelhurst, he's possibly the John Williams of...
I was just going to say, he is the John Williams of
I think he is.
British sitcom.
We're available on all podcast platforms and on social media at YHB Watching Pod on Twitter and Facebook, so please subscribe, get in touch, and come and have a laugh with us.